Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learn back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I am going to be talking about the natal chart of legendary NFL coach Bill Belichick. Uh, First thing I want to get at is the chart that this is based on online on astro.com has a C rating. It's really somewhat speculative. I mean, it's approximated is what it's stated on the site. Gives Bill Belichick a Virgo ascendant. But anyway, based on this, well, okay, Bill Belichick has his sun in Aries, Capricorn moon, Virgo ascendant. This being the case, well, I see the way this manifests with him is wanting to lead, be first. That's the basic one of Aries. It's done perhaps with this Capricorn moon, consistency, professionalism, seriousness, with a lot of ambition. And given that Virgo is rising, this could flavor this with a lot of meticulous energy, doing really following up with these the sun basic wants and the moon needs with very meticulous attention to detail, a lot of analysis. I think a lot of this Virgo rising is why it's attributed to why Bill Belichick is really such a master dissecting opposing defenses and offenses and great powers of analysis. And this has helped contribute to why he's such a great coach, I believe. Now, according to this chart, he does have the majority of planets on the top half of the chart, which could suggest more extroverted than introverted, being more optimistic than pessimistic, and also more objective than subjective. And inclines a person to be more connected with the public life and feel more comfortable as far as being around people and going places where people congregate, as opposed to being by yourself and in solitude or seclusion or what have you. But and also too, he has a balance of planets on both sides of the chart, the left and the right side of the chart, which can show he could vacillate between self-reliance and independence and asking for help. But it also can show very strong ability of knowing when to ask for help and when to decline and do things on his own. I think his strong Aries influence in his chart shows that he probably actually may lean a little bit more toward doing things on his own, and that he's probably a little bit more self-reliant and self-sufficient, in contrast to being dependent on others. And another thing too is and really, and it could also show a balance too of doing things collaboratively with others, as opposed to just doing things by yourself. And another thing too in his chart is that he has the majority of his major astrological influences in cardinal signs, which could indicate a lot of enterprise, a lot of initiative, not really wanting to procrastinate or hesitate on things, trying to get things started very quickly, very rapidly, without prolonging things too much, a lot of drive and action. And he's probably very activity oriented. He's the kind of person that might start a multitude of things simultaneously, but not necessarily quite finish them. I know he has certain powers of being able to finish things, given his success in the NFL and all those Super Bowl titles he has, of course. But anyway, and a lot of enthusiasm. I mean, I want to talk about the fact he has most of his major astrological influences in fire signs. This could give much energy, vitality, a lot of exuberance and enthusiasm, vibrancy, leadership prowess and ability. It could make him a little bit temperamental and rather disputatious and argumentative, though, but it can give very strong leadership prowess again, and also very fiery temperament, to say the absolute least. So anyway, well, the next thing I want to talk about, his final or chart signature is an Aries, which of course this could reinforce and accentuate his strong Aries qualities. Anyway, he has a number of planets in Aries to begin with, but but I don't see, like in his, like, say if somebody had a different chart signature as opposed to their sun, moon, or ascendant, I would say that it wouldn't supersede or surpass the sun, moon, or ascendant in terms of its significance or influence on the chart. But the fact that it's in the same sign as his sun can merely reaffirm and reinforce and accentuate that Aries energy very strongly. But at the same time, I don't know if this necessarily supersedes his moon and ascendant in terms of its significance. But because the sun is in Aries, that could be, you could have a little more of a balance though because of that, if you understand what I'm saying. But at the same time, the final chart signature by itself, I don't see it as surpassing or superseding the sun, moon, or ascendant in significance. But in this case, given it's the same sign as the sun, it merely reinforces and reaffirms that Aries energy and enlarges it perhaps to some degree. The fact that I'll get to this a little bit. The fact that Jupiter makes a conjunction to his sun, I would say, enlarges those Aries attributes, the basic character of him, Aries character traits. But anyway, well, the next thing up is that he has a preponderance of planets in the third quadrant in his chart. And of course, the third quadrant in astrology consists of houses 7, 8, and 9. And this is where one can focus on when you look at this on there. Really, in this case, the way it might manifest within the 7th house is competition. 8th house is the house of Scorpio, resiliency and crisis, and really transformation. And on the 9th house could be connected with sports because it does correspond with the zodiac sign Sagittarius. So you could do the math. A lot of this is competition that could be sports related, and where he finds himself having to make adjustments, whether it's to the other opposing team's offense or defense, or coming back from adversity, dealing with crisis situations, and being able to do so very well, as a matter of fact. But anyway, well, the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that he only, according to this chart, of course, again, remember, it is the C rating is approximated from that approximate from that birth time. This is anyway. This is for him. Well, he only has the ascendant in MC in mutable signs, and he does, in this chart, puts Taurus in transigent immutable Taurus on the 9th house cusp of philosophy. So you could see why he can be somewhat, this is a person that really will likely have others may have to make the compromises and adjustments in the relationships with him. It could show in nature that for him really is about really not wavering from the course, which is really actually can be positive, but he can lack certain adaptability, mutability, or what have you, the difficulty rolling with the tide, so to speak. He probably has a very strong mindset where it's either his way or the highway, in that, although that could be attributed as to why played his very strong role and why he's become such a successful coach, and maybe unequivocally the best NFL coach in history. But at the same time, this is a person that may lack the ability to adapt to adverse circumstances, although we know that he actually can to some degree, given that he's had certain situations where he's lost players during the off season, and they found ways to improvise or supplant certain talent when someone leaves. But when a good player leaves, he often is able to even take someone that might be seen as mediocre and transform them into something really, somebody that can be really an upper echelon or elite player, actually. So anyway, the thing about this too, another thing I wanted to talk about, and again, if his ascendant is in Virgo, this does modify things a little, because the ascendant is very dominant. It's your outward expression, your outer demeanor. It shows he's probably likely more easygoing than the typical Sun and Aries Capricorn Moon combination. So I would say for him, he does have certain adaptability, but it's not a lot compared to the rest of the energy in his chart. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is that he has, according to this chart, the chart ruler in the 7th house. Now, by itself, it can be somebody that can be rather, just very competitive, a person that might be a little bit difficult at times, but there can be a strong focus. A lot of this analytical ability, the ability to analyze and dissect, goes into the competition with Bill Belichick. I could see how this might actually be very close to his actual chart anyway, even though it is approximated. Because he brings, I could see him bringing a lot of that Virgo energy, the analysis, the analytical ability, again, the ability to decipher defenses into this ability to decipher and analyze into the seventh house, which of course the seventh house is about competition and open adversaries. The opposition can be seen as the open adversary. So anyway, and there's also probably very strong focus on his relationships and also partnership situations and doing things with others collaboratively. That's where a lot of the Virgo energy may actually be injected into the Virgo rising energy, is factoring in strongly. But anyway, now another thing too, he has Mercury in Aries retrograde in his seventh house, and I thought that's very interesting because many of you may notice that Bill Belichick is somebody that, I mean, despite having an Aries sun, which you would see is very outgoing and gregarious to some degree, not as much as Leo, but a person that would really still likes to come out and shine and be a person that wants some kind of limelight. And Aries can be very outgoing given their assertive, their aggressive nature. They're the ones that'll often speak up when others are more reticent or taciturn. But with him, it's very interesting. His chart shows me that he's not quite as outgoing, nearly as outgoing as the typical Aries. Part of this is attributed to the Mercury in Aries being retrograde, and it's in the seventh house of relationships. Now, many of you may notice when Bill Belichick answers questions from whether it's reporters or what have you, he's very concise and succinct, puts things very succinctly. He say, we're on to the next team or something similar. He often won't elaborate or expound too much on questions that are asked. They're put very succinctly, and he's very soft-spoken when he speaks as well. And I'm thinking a lot of this has to do with the Mercury in Aries retrograde. Mercury, when it's retrograde, it's often about people listening a lot more as opposed to dominating conversations. They're often more about listening, taking things in, and answering questions very succinctly, and not really saying an overabundance of things. And the fact that it's in his seventh house, it shows how reticent, how quiet he is on matters connected with competition, in this case sports competition. And of course Aries can be connected with sports. I see the fire signs in general being associated with sports. I think it's very interesting how this manifests and pans out with him. Now, in the fact that I believe it makes a conjunction to Venus, that he values this very well, and it's something he's not going to waver from in terms of his style of communication. Hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that. Well, the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that he has could be playing a role in why he's so successful in sports. He has the Sun conjunct Jupiter in Aries in the 8th house. Now, Sun conjunct Jupiter can also be very auspicious for your vitality, matters with the physical body to some degree. Yes, the ascendant is more connected with the physical body, but the sun can play a role as well in being an energetic Aries being. Sun in Aries in its exaltation makes it very good. It could also be, again, very fortuitous and auspicious for sports because Jupiter can be connected with it. And you have it in the 8th house. Again, the 8th house could be connected with resiliency, transformation, and power. And he does have, I believe, a lot of pull, a lot of power. I do believe he does have some pull in terms of players that are acquired on his team, that are retained, who gets to stay, who gets to go. So you can understand how that manifests with him, and the ability to control things with matters with sports as well in the competition. Being able to, could be as far as game management, for example. So those are some ways I think this pans out with Bill Belichick. Now, another thing about Bill Belichick as well is that I notice is that going back to the fact he's very taciturn, very quiet, very reticent, doesn't really say a lot. Not the most loquacious person. I saw a number of elements in his chart for this. Now, not just I talked about the Mercury retrograde before, which of course can be very about being they're given very concise answers to responding very succinctly. Um, and also, according to this chart, has Scorpio on the third house cusp, and Scorpio on the third house cusp can be very secretive regarding their communications, regarding information they know that they've assimilated. It's part of the reason why he might be very guarded in terms of what he reveals. Yes, coaches in general are often very secretive about, of course, their game plans and whether their schemes and their strategizing or what have you. But Bill Belichick seems to be even more guarded than the average person. It's like he won't hardly say anything ever about matters pertaining to that. And he also, according to this chart, has the ruler of the third house in the 12th house of restrictions. So you could say a lot of his communications are behind closed doors, and it plays a role as to why there's some restrictions with his communications, why he's holds back a lot and he doesn't really talk a lot to too many people. I don't believe, especially these reporters, and I do respect and understand why this doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't have the ability to articulate or communicate or what have you. I think in his case, the way it might manifest, it's just the amount of people he's actually talking to can be restricted. And if I remember right, the rulers of the third house, Mars and Pluto, were both retrograde, so that could even maybe accentuating that energy a little bit more. Well, last but not least, this is a little bit complicated, a little convoluted. Excuse me, bear with me, people. That Bill Belichick in his chart, I would call a weak yacht configuration, according to this chart, where I'm using the Gemini MC as one of the legs in it, and Pluto in Leo. And what it is, it conjuncts the apex or focal point, at least, even if it's long, it conjuncts the moon in Capricorn in the fifth house of sports. So really the way this manifests with him, I believe, is you're putting in, that the Gemini MC is that reputation of being a thinker, being very shrewd and cunning, being able to outmaneuver others, and in this case the opposition. And then the Pluto in Leo, of course, about having the power, gives power to this, I believe, and really having and the ability to be resilient, perhaps be in control, and the fact that it's making this energy, both these astrological points are making the in conjunct, even if they're long ones, to the moon in Capricorn in the fifth house. The moon in Capricorn in the fifth house, being the apex or focal point, can be that finger pointing Bill Belichick into action. It's that point of perhaps very prodigious, monumental achievement, possibly. And given that we're talking about moon in Capricorn in the fifth house, this is very obvious to me. It stands out because this is about him being getting that public recognition, something connected with sports, but the moon in Capricorn itself about being perhaps recognized for something connected with your ambitions, your career, and also somebody that could be a position of authority. And that could be where that recognition lies, given you're talking about the moon in astrology. The moon in astrology can reflect how one wants to be recognized. And in this case, a person that could be very consistent, single-minded, ambitious, and a person that's very career oriented, and again being in the fifth house of sports, a position of authority in sports. And this is where he obviously has made some monumental achievements. So it wouldn't surprise me if the chart might actually at least be very close to his actual true chart, even though the precise time of birth with him is still unknown. Anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for my take on the natal chart of Bill Belichick. And until next time, people, Edwin Learns, stay well.